6:42 a.m. VIP departure gate. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Derek Langston stepped into the first-class cabin with the calm demeanor of someone well acquainted with the space. He wore a charcoal gray suit, unpretentious, yet refined, a crisp white shirt, and a classic brown leather watch on his wrist. No flashy brand logos, no ostentatious flair, just the quiet presence of a man who knows his worth. He walked directly to seat 2A, sat down, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a tablet and the draft of a speech he would deliver later that afternoon at the Global Ethics and Technology Conference in San Francisco. It wasn't just a vital talk representing New Link Technologies, the company he had founded, but a voice for people like him, those once dismissed, doubted, and underestimated. The flight, operated by Aureus Air and promoted as genuine first-class, promised flawless service. Lie-flat seats, warm towels, and champagne before takeoff. But even the most polished promise could not override deeply ingrained bias. A flight attendant approached as Derek buckled his seatbelt and opened the presentation app on his tablet. She wore a polite but glacial smile, the kind that's been professionally rehearsed to conceal disdain behind courtesy. "Sir," she said gently, touching the back of the seat before him, like she was marking territory. "There seems to be a mix-up. We'll need you to relocate to another seat to accommodate our VIP passenger, Ms. Evelyn Carrington." She stepped aside. Behind her stood a white woman in her mid-50s, with blonde hair in a tight updo, sporting a Cartier watch and a blood-red Hermes handbag. Evelyn said nothing. She nodded at the attendant and stared at Derek, as if waiting for him to vacate what she saw as her rightful seat. Derek furrowed his brow, reached into his wallet, and calmly presented his Diamond member card from Aureus Air and his boarding pass. "I'm a Diamond member. This is my seat booked and fully paid." The flight attendant, Melanie Green, glanced at the card and looked visibly uncomfortable. But within a second, she composed herself, as if trained for such moments. "Yes, I understand. But Ms. Carrington is a regular guest. She always sits here on morning flights. We're hoping you could be a little flexible." "You mean I should leave my reserved seat just because a regular wants to sit here?" Melanie didn't answer directly. She leaned in with that same controlled smile. The cabin fell into an odd hush. The other first-class passengers, men in expensive suits who read the Wall Street Journal and wore wireless headphones, looked up. No one said anything, but everyone heard. Someone began recording discreetly on the phone. A couple in seat 2C whispered to each other. Evelyn leaned slightly closer to Derek, her voice low, but just loud enough for everyone in the row to hear. "I always sit there. It's practically my seat. You understand? Don't you?" Derek's expression remained composed, but deep in his eyes was a familiarity with this kind of sugar-coated humiliation. "I understand," he said, folding his tablet and resting his hands calmly on his lap, "that today won't be like every other day." And he didn't move. 7:04 a.m. Still in the first-class cabin, Aureus Air Flight 308. Melanie Green returned, but this time she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Stuart Chambers, the cabin supervisor, a tall white man with graying hair and a perfectly pressed suit. His face was composed, but his eyes radiated firmness. He didn't look directly at Derek when he spoke, instead, addressing the cabin like he was laying down the rules to a group of unruly students. "Sir, to ensure the comfort of our most loyal passenger, we kindly ask that you cooperate and move to seat 4C, also in first class, so that Ms. Carrington may use her preferred seat." Derek turned to face Stuart, his voice measured and clear. "I paid for this seat. I'm a Diamond member. I have every right to remain in the seat I reserved, and no Aureus policy states a preferred seat of a loyal passenger can override another customer's confirmed reservation." Stuart hesitated for half a second, clearly surprised by the pushback. But then, with the polished tone of someone used to power plays, he stepped in closer. We'd prefer not to escalate this, but if you refuse to cooperate, we'll be forced to report the matter to the captain." Across from them, a young Asian passenger in a hoodie and headphones subtly angled his phone to record the interaction. Behind them, a middle-aged black woman in a purple cardigan began recording audio. No one spoke, but their eyes said everything. Evelyn Carrington remained standing, clutching her red handbag like it symbolized entitlement. "I don't have time for this nonsense," she snapped. "I have a meeting with Senator Adams this afternoon. I always sit in seat 2A. I don't understand how someone like you could have reserved it before me." Someone like me. For the first time, Derek repeated, letting his voice drop an octave low and sharp. "Would you care to clarify what you mean by that?" Evelyn took a half step back. Melanie quickly stepped in, trying to diffuse the tension. "Let's all just calm down. This is just a misunderstanding. We don't want to create a scene." "Do we?" "No." Derek answered, his tone icy. "We don't, but it seems like you all are working hard to create one." The tension in the cabin thickened. The soft ding of seatbelt chimes could no longer drown out the rising sense of conflict spreading through the rows. Passengers leaned forward now, fully invested, watching to see if they were witnessing racial discrimination unfold in real time. Then came the turning point. Seemingly too accustomed to getting her way, Evelyn reached into her handbag and discreetly handed Melanie a folded bill, as if it were a casual thank you for loyal service. But the swift and subtle gesture did not escape the phone recording from 4 different corners of the cabin. One passenger even whispered, "Did she just try to bribe the flight attendant?" Melanie's face flushed as she quickly tucked the bill into her uniform pocket. But it was too late. A small act had ignited a firestorm that would burn to consequence. Stewart, seemingly unaware they were under surveillance, leaned in close to Derek, his voice low and blade sharp. "We can handle this quietly, or we can handle it in a way that ensures you never fly with Aureus again. The choice is yours." Derek looked him squarely in the eye. The warmth in his gaze was gone. "I choose to stay, and I choose not to be silent anymore." And with that, the game began. Not just between one passenger and a flight crew, but between a black man who refused to be diminished, and a system about to be forced to bow. 7:12 a.m. First class cabin, Aureus. Air flight 308. The cockpit door swung open less than 3 minutes after Stuart Chambers turned away. Captain Douglas Vance, a white man in his 50s with a broad build and a face chiseled like stone, stepped out, his glare sharp and cold, like a man who had logged tens of thousands of flight hours, but had yet to learn the fundamental lesson of human dignity. Behind him walked Melanie, now without her glasses, revealing panic in her eyes, and Stuart, his face flushed crimson, like a bottle of red wine, pacing quickly, as though bracing for a crisis he had completely lost control over. "Are you Derek Coleman?" Captain Vance asked, his voice low, but carrying the force to crack anyone's composure. Derek looked up, his gaze unwavering. "Yes. I've presented my diamond membership card and boarding pass, and I'm seated in the exact seat assigned to me, 2A. Vance nodded slightly, then glanced at Evelyn Carrington, who stood with folded arms and a smug expression. "Ms. Carrington, please be patient for just a moment." Then he turned back to Derek. "The crew reports that your behavior is disrupting the boarding process. If you refuse to cooperate, I must ask you to deplane." A wave of whispers swept through the cabin. A middle-aged Arab woman snapped open her phone camera. A young white man shook his head in disbelief. A flight attendant standing farther back grimaced, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding events. Derek didn't move. Calmly, he reached into his blazer pocket, pulled out his smartphone, placed it on his lap, opened the camera app, and hit record. "Captain Vance," he said in a calm and terrifyingly steady voice, "you're threatening to remove me from this flight, despite my having a valid ticket, diamond member status, and being seated in the correct seat because another passenger usually sits here. Douglas tightened the strap of his captain's cap, his throat tightening. I'm acting in the interest of passenger safety and experience. Safety? Derek tilted his head slightly, or racial preference. And that's when the unexpected pivot happened. A teenage boy seated in 3B, wearing a private school uniform, spoke up clearly and without hesitation. He didn't do anything wrong. My mom's a Diamond member too, and she says this guy's being mistreated. This is discrimination. Several others began nodding. An elderly Asian woman called out, "Don't touch him. I've recorded everything." Captain Vance began to sweat. He glanced at Stuart, Melanie, and Evelyn, who now looked away with thinly veiled disdain. None of them had anything to say that could salvage the moment. This was no longer a discussion. It had become a trial by public opinion. The stare of cameras, the clatter of phone keys, and the click of shutters echoed through the cabin like hammer blows against Aureus Air's reputation. Derek calmly continued, his eyes locked on the captain. I'm not a stranger. I'm the proud founder of the company that provides the AI complaint resolution system for over 30 American airlines. I chose to fly Aureus because I once believed this was a place of fairness and professionalism. And then he enunciated each word like a blade. Looks like I was wrong. Ding! A passenger in row 1 pressed the flight attendant call button. I'd like the full names of the captain and flight attendants who just tried to remove this man from his seat. The tide had turned, but what no one on board yet realized, it was that Derek still hadn't played his strongest card. 7:18 a.m. Still docked at Gate 12 Atlanta International Airport. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was thick like a storm about to break. Captain Douglas Vance stood in front of seat 2A, his face taut with tension, while Derek Coleman sat upright, the phone still recording his gaze, calm but sharp as a blade, silently resting against his opponent's throat. Stuart Chambers, the lead first-class supervisor, tried to step in with a flustered look. "Captain, if I could." "Step back." Vance cut him off without glancing in his direction. But he was beginning to feel the chill not from the cabin's temperature, but from the eyes of every passenger fixed on him like a silent courtroom. Behind them, Melanie, the original flight attendant, was pale, gripping her untouched notepad. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a creeping fear. Which camera was pointed at her from what angle, and how much had it already captured? Evelyn Carrington, the woman who had indirectly started it all, no longer stood tall. She had taken a step back, her eyes wavering, aware that the stares had shifted away from Derek and were now squarely aimed at her. Outside the cabin, the ground crew was getting anxious. Takeoff was already behind schedule. Then, without warning, the familiar sound of the intercom buzzed a call from Aureus Airlines headquarters. Captain Vance stepped toward the cockpit, picked up the handset, and listened silently. 15 seconds later, his expression changed. He slowly hung up the phone and returned to the first-class cabin with a completely different demeanor, not as the man in command from just minutes ago, but as someone who had just been forced to reevaluate everything. He approached Derek quietly. The cabin was dead silent. No one spoke. Mr. Coleman Vance began calling him correctly for the first time. "We apologize for the misunderstanding. You are fully entitled to remain in seat 2A. There was no applause, no cheers, but the silent quake had shattered the polished mask of power that had cloaked them. Derek didn't rush to respond. He tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "So now I'm welcome. But 10 minutes ago, I was treated like a trespasser. What changed?" Captain Vance swallowed hard. But before he could respond, an internal announcement came through the crew's headsets. From Legal Urgent, all interactions with passenger. Derek Coleman must follow special protocol. This is a strategic-level customer tied to upcoming partnerships. Suspend all escalation until further instructions from the CEO. The final sentence rang in Melanie's earpiece, making her nearly drop her notebook. Evelyn Carrington pulled out her phone to make a call, but was interrupted by a passenger seated behind her. "Ma'am, perhaps you should apologize before making your next phone call." The incident had gone far beyond a seat dispute. It had become a test for the entire system and the public image of Aureus Airlines. Derek calmly tapped the record button, stopping the video. He stood not to leave his seat, but because it was time to take command. "I'll have a hot towel. And please ensure no one touches my luggage during the flight," he said, voice steady but full of weight. Captain Vance nodded and turned back toward the cockpit, like a man who had just lost a game he never fully understood. But the real game was beginning. Derek had already sent a message: activate contingency plan. Prep emergency shareholder call if needed. Somewhere inside Aureus headquarters, PR consultants and legal advisors were beginning to realize they hadn't just messed with a passenger. They had crossed a strategist, a tech investor, a man who could shake the executive board with a flick of his finger. The storm in the skies hadn't passed. But this time, Derek Coleman held the controls. 7:39 a.m., 38th floor. Executive Office, Aureus Airlines. Headquarters, New York. In the sleek glass office where the morning sun had just begun to reflect off polished steel beams, Jonathan Hayworth, CEO of Aureus Airlines, was sipping his morning espresso when the internal line rang 3 sharp, urgent tones. He set his cup down and pressed the button. Jonathan speaking. A trembling voice replied, "Sir, you need to see this video immediately. It's about Flight 408 from Atlanta to San Francisco. A first-class passenger was threatened, nearly forced out of his seat." Hayworth sighed. "And incidents like this happen weekly. The comms team will handle it." "No, sir." The voice on the line cut in, panicked. "The passenger is Derek Coleman." That name dropped like a block of ice. Jonathan Hayworth froze. His eyes stopped on the financial dashboard displayed on his monitor, where Coleman Holdings had just confirmed an increased stake in Aureus, 28% ownership. "What did you say?" "It's Derek Coleman, CEO of Novix Systems, the one negotiating the $80 million system conversion contract for our global reservation platform. The same man we invited to HQ next week to finalize the deal." Jonathan quickly opened the video link sent by the comms team. In under 60 seconds, he saw the moment flight attendant Melanie asked Derek to switch seats. Evelyn Carrington slipping cash into Trevor's pocket. Derek calmly saying, "I'm being removed from a seat I paid for because I'm not the customer you deem worthy." What exactly are your standards? Each frame was a dagger to Jonathan's spine. He knew that Aureus's stock could lose hundreds of millions in value within hours if this video spread. Just then his cell phone buzzed. "Caller Derek Coleman." Jonathan swallowed hard, straightened his collar, and answered. "Derek." He began, trying to sound cordial. "I just heard what happened. I'm so sorry." Stop." "Jonathan." Derek interrupted, his tone low and cold as ice. "This isn't a sympathy call. This is a defining moment." Silence. Jonathan waited. Derek continued. "I want a special board meeting scheduled today. Virtual or in person. You choose." Derek, wait. "We can discipline the staff, handle this quietly. I'll personally. No apologies. I want action. I want a list of everyone involved suspended immediately. I want a full reform commitment from the board. And I want you to stand with me before the press and own the mistake." Jonathan leaned back in his chair. He knew Derek wasn't bluffing. If he refused, Novix would pull its investment. Other investors would follow. The stock would nosedive. And he, Jonathan Hayworth, would become the sacrificial lamb. "Understood." He exhaled, voice subdued. "The meeting will happen within 2 hours. I'll prepare everything you asked for." Good, Derek said, and hung up without another word. In the silence of his office, Jonathan could still hear the 6 words Derek had said just before ending the call. I'm not demanding revenge. I'm demanding justice. Not far away in another conference room, Aureus' legal team began drafting an emergency statement. Lawyers, PR experts, and operations directors were summoned. The crisis had just begun, but the power had entirely shifted into the hands of the man they once tried to remove from his seat, simply because of his skin color. This time, he was sitting in the highest seat of all, 9:02 a.m., Executive Zenith Boardroom, Aureus Airlines. Headquarters. Ceiling lights reflected off the polished walnut of the 12-meter-long boardroom table. In the fully soundproofed room, 23 premium leather chairs were gradually filled by members of the board, strategic shareholders, senior legal counsel, and the executive leadership team. The tension was razor sharp. Every gaze was fixed on the massive LED screen at the head of the table. On it, Derek Coleman appeared via video conference. He wore a white shirt, no tie, eyes calm, but razor-edged. Beside him sat COO Elise Warren, Chief Legal Officer Daniel Cho, and 2 legal aides jotting down every word. CEO Jonathan Hayworth stood before the board, struggling to keep his tone steady. I want to thank you all for arriving earlier than scheduled. We have a serious situation that requires immediate resolution. Derek raised an eyebrow slightly, his hands clasped calmly before him. He didn't interrupt. Jonathan continued. This morning, a first-class passenger on Flight 408, Mr. Coleman himself, was unjustly and improperly asked to vacate his seat. During the incident, a crew member accepted money to favor another passenger. The entire event was recorded and is now spreading rapidly. One board member, Lillian Morante, director of the Skystone Investment Fund, tapped the table, her face stern. May I ask who is directly responsible for how Mr. Coleman was treated? Jonathan took a deep breath. Lead flight attendant, Melanie Hale, flight supervisor, Trevor Finch, and Captain Douglas Kane. All 3 have been immediately suspended, pending investigation. Derek spoke for the first time, his voice steady and clear. I'm not asking for individual punishment. I'm demanding systemic accountability. As part of our technology partnership assessment, I've been quietly reviewing Aureus's internal processes and culture for the past 3 months. But this morning, you showed me your true nature. On screen, he gestured toward a file, a Novix AI-generated employee and behavioral analytics report. Charts appeared. 67% of complaints from passengers of color were ignored or inadequately addressed. 31% of frontline staff had received insufficient training on discrimination. Promotion rate for Black employees under 9%, despite making up over 30% of mid-level staff. Silence fell. These figures had never been made public. Jonathan swallowed hard. Elise Novix's COO chimed in. We also uncovered that your internal evaluation system shows clear bias. Certain frequent passengers were tagged with informal priority status, one of them being the individual who triggered this morning's incident, Mrs. Evelyn Carrington. Ms. Morante shook her head, whispering, This is systemic abuse of power. At that moment, Derek concluded, as a 28% shareholder and representative of a strategic investor group, I am officially requesting 1. Immediate dismissal of the 3 in-flight personnel involved. 2. A public apology was issued to the media within 24 hours. 3. Implementation of Novix's Fair Passenger Evaluation System. 4. Mandatory comprehensive training on awareness, conduct, and equity for all employees. 5. Establishment of an independent aviation ethics committee, monitored by a third party. A young shareholder raised his hand. What happens if we refuse? Derek didn't smile, but his gaze turned ice cold. I will liquidate all holdings on the open market within 72 hours. That capital will be redirected to your competitor Andaris Air, with whom I'm also negotiating. Your stock will nosedive. And I won't say a word to the press. I only need silence. The air froze. Jonathan stood motionless. A senior board member quietly muttered, "He's not making a threat. He's making a declaration." Finally, Ms. Morante slammed her hand on the table. "I support Mr. Coleman's proposal. We must redefine who we are or disappear." Hands went up around the table. The vote concluded faster than any meeting in Aureus's history. Final tally 20 in favor, 2 abstaining, and 1 opposed. Derek nodded. On screen, he didn't gloat. He stated, "Then let the change begin today." The meeting ended in silence. But everyone understood from that moment forward, Aureus was no longer the same airline. It had become a symbol on the brink of rebirth or ruin, depending on whether it could learn from the man once denied his seat simply because of his skin color. 1:14 p.m. Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport. From the executive lounge rooftop at the airport, Elise Warren, COO of Novix, quietly watched as an Airbus A350 was being pushed back from the gate. The words, Aureus Airlines, still gleamed on its fuselage, still radiant. But beneath the metallic sheen, a profound and silent shift was underway. In the business class cabin, Karen Whitlock, the woman who had bribed her way into seat 2A, was no longer there. Instead, that seat remained empty, marking a somber silence. Passengers had no idea that just a day before, the man forcibly removed from that seat, Derek Coleman, was the catalyst for thrusting the entire airline into a historic reform. At the Human Resources Training Room, B1 Aureus Airlines headquarters, the sound of video playback echoed through the room. On a large screen, a clip played of Trevor, the flight supervisor, leaning down to accept cash from Karen, then walking off as if completing a courtesy task. Tricia Monroe, the newly appointed HR director, stood before nearly 80 staff members, ranging from pilots to flight attendants to ground crew. Her face was firm, but not without compassion. "Look closely at this moment," Tricia said, her voice not loud, but unflinching. "This isn't just accepting money. This is exchanging the honor of an entire organization for favoritism." Nearby, Daniel Cho, chief legal officer of Novix, presented newly ratified clauses in the Employee Code of Ethics. No acceptance of gifts or cash under any form. All seat dispute procedures must be recorded and archived. Every customer-facing employee will undergo 3 months of nonverbal behavior tracking via AI monitoring at the crew lounge. O'Hare Airport, Chicago. Jessica Hale, the lead flight attendant who had been suspended, sat with her head down in an empty lounge. In her hand was a summons to attend the Second Flight Program, a rehabilitation initiative for personnel involved in bias or discriminatory conduct. On the table before her sat a new handbook titled Awareness, Responsibility, Restoration. Inside, Derek had penned the foreword in his signature. Forgiveness does not begin with an apology. It begins with the courage to look back at your mistakes. Jessica inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, she felt afraid. Not of losing her job, but of facing herself. At the airport operations office, JFK New York CEO Jonathan Hayworth and his advisors were reviewing sweeping reform proposals. 1. A 24-hour halt on all domestic flights for frontline employee retraining. 2. Implementation of Novix's real-time customer feedback system. 3. Create a passenger dignity fund to handle cases of discriminatory incidents publicly with a transparent quarterly report. Jonathan gripped his pen tightly. Every decision from now on could either rescue the company or sink it. But he knew that one more minute of delay would be a betrayal to every passenger who had ever trusted them. 4:22 p.m. A video begins to go viral. On TikTok, a video surfaced of Derek calmly speaking to the camera. "I don't need special treatment. I just need to be treated fairly like everyone else." The clip reached 2 million views in 3 hours. The hashtag #C2A Justice on Twitter climbed to the top 3 global trends. An article from The Atlantic appeared. One seat, one moral test. How a Enger changed the entire airline industry. End of day. Derek's private room. Grand Marlin Hotel, Washington, D.C. Derek sat alone, his laptop open. Elise had sent him a message. "We won the first round, but there are more flights ahead." Derek typed back, "I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting so no one else has to feel that way again." He looked out the window. An airplane glided across the darkening purple sky. No longer a symbol of power or status, but a reminder. Every passenger, every person deserves equal respect. 8:45 a.m. Emergency Communications Office, Aureus Airlines Headquarters, New York. On massive LED monitors, the view count for the video documenting the incident kept surging. 12.4 million, 13.2 million, 15 million views in less than 24 hours. Hashtags like #Justice for Derek, #Seat Justice, #Platinum Bias, and #Aureus Airlines Discrimination dominated Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, and even the morning broadcast on CNN. Monica Delacroix, Director of Communications, sat at the eye of the storm. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles from lack of sleep, fingers ceaselessly scanning news streams. Across from her CEO, Jonathan Hayworth, lifted his coffee cup but didn't drink. His screen displayed an editorial from the New York Times with a chilling headline, "Aureus Airlines CEO gets removed from his flight, and the airline industry's integrity is now on trial." 10:13 a.m. Surprise press conference at Georgetown University. While the media swarmed Aureus HQ, Derek Coleman stepped onto the auditorium stage at Georgetown University, where he had been scheduled to speak at the Ethics and Global Technology Conference. But instead of lecturing on AI, Derek opened his laptop, connected it to the projector, and played the video of himself being removed from seat 2A. The auditorium was dead silent. 1 minute after the video ended, Derek spoke. "I've developed technology to detect bias in customer service. However, technology cannot replace a person's courage in the moment. And yesterday morning, many chose to look away. The silence shattered into a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 whole minutes." 11:00 a.m. CNN breaking news. Broadcast. Derek Coleman, CEO of Novix Technologies and strategic investor in Aureus Airlines, was forcibly removed from his paid-assigned first-class seat solely because of his skin color. The video shows a flight attendant and cabin manager accepting a bribe from another passenger. The footage has caused a global uproar. Aureus stock is in free fall, losing nearly 18% in a single morning. The White House has requested the FAA initiate a special review of the airline. 1:15 p.m. Derek's legal team Manhattan office. Hundreds of press inquiries flooded in. Derek's team of attorneys and Novix chief legal officer, Jalen Ortiz, were finalizing a lawsuit that cited systemic racial discrimination, violation of transportation contract, public humiliation and degradation, bribery, and cover-up of misconduct. "We're not suing for money," Jalen stated firmly. "We're suing to force an entire industry to change." 4:00 p.m. Embassies. Begin responding. The Canadian Ministry of Transport released a statement requiring Aureus Airlines to provide an explanation or face restricted airspace access. The Nigerian embassy tweeted, "Discrimination has no nationality, but human dignity is universal." NHK Japan aired the headline, "The man who built anti-bias technology becomes a victim of the very bias he fought." 6:30 p.m. Rival airlines. Enter the arena, United Delta and Emirates. Each released statements. "We don't judge passengers by skin color. We judge by respect." Delta cleverly added the hashtag #Seat2AIs for everyone. This wasn't just PR. It was a direct blow to Aureus, as competitors began actively courting platinum-level customers outraged by the scandal. 8:00 p.m. National television interview. In a live sit-down with Anderson Cooper, Derek spoke calmly and deliberately. "I don't want to see anyone fired. But I want an entire industry to understand. Some things must never happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone. Respect is not a privilege. Respect is a default. It should be the standard, not a reward for wealth or power." Late evening. A small airport in Minnesota. A young flight attendant, Tyler Ramos, read the news on his phone and set it beside his coffee. He turned to his coworker and said, "Starting tomorrow, I'll never say, 'That's not possible' to someone again, just because they don't look like you or me." 8:00 a.m. Aureus Airlines headquarters, 47th floor. Special shareholders meeting. Gray clouds hung low over Manhattan, but the atmosphere on the top floor of the glass building housing Aureus headquarters was tenser than the weather itself. All 14 chairs around the long boardroom table were filled. The people seated, from top investors and financial directors to board members, shared the same expression, anxious though trying hard to appear calm. Suddenly, the door swung open. Derek Coleman stepped in. No entourage, no security detail. He wore a charcoal gray suit and a slim black tie, walked with slow, composed steps, and carried an air of quiet gravity. Each footfall seemed to bear the weight of millions of eyes, from social media, the financial world, and the airline industry gasping for accountability. Walking behind him was Elise Thompson, COO of Novix, Jalen Ortiz, Chief Legal Counsel, and 2 members of the International Ethics Advisory Board. Some board members stood not out of courtesy, but because they knew the man entering the room now held the power. 8:10 a.m. The meeting begins. Jonathan Hayworth, CEO of Aureus, opened. "We are here today to confront the consequences, and I believe the most appropriate person to open this session is Mr. Derek Coleman." No slides, no prepared speech. Derek placed his phone on the table, its screen displaying the now famous video the moment he was pulled from seat 2A. He didn't hit play. Everyone had seen it enough to remember each frame, but even the still image drew a painful silence across the room. "I'm not here to demand an apology," Derek began, voice steady and low. "I'm here to ask one question. How many others have been treated like me without cameras, social media, or a voice board member?" Carl Mendez, representing a global investment fund, nodded slightly. His expression was one of admission. The system needed dismantling. 8:27 a.m. Derek lays down the terms. Derek opened the folder before him. 1. Immediate termination of 3 involved individuals. 2. Chief Flight Attendant Charlotte Duvall. 3. Business Class Manager Daniel Frost. 4. Captain Michael Riley. 5. Lifetime ban on passenger Karen Whitmore, who attempted to bribe crew, public announcement required. 6. Temporary 48-hour suspension of all Aureus flights for mandatory bias awareness and customer handling training for frontline staff. 7. Establishment of an independent ethics board managed by a third party with authority to monitor and publicly report discrimination behavior within the system. 8. Internal penalty. All executive bonuses for the current quarter are to be withheld and redirected to establish the Forgotten Passenger Fund, to support victims of discrimination who lack the means to fight back. 8:50 a.m. Resistance and pushback. Whispers rose. Joseph Lang, CFO, muttered, "A former passenger is strong-arming us." Derek looked up. "I wasn't strong-armed. I was removed from a seat I paid for, and now I'm reclaiming a different seat, one of power." Silence. Elise stood. "Novix currently holds 26.7% of Aureus stock. If Mr. Coleman pulls out and publicly divests, Aureus will lose nearly 40% of its market value within 72 hours. Jalen Ortiz followed, eyes sharp. "And we haven't even mentioned the $70 million systems upgrade contract. It's unsigned, and it can go to any other airline." 9:07 a.m. A historic vote. An emergency resolution was introduced. Approve all of Mr. Derek Coleman's terms, or face irreversible shareholder and PR crisis. The results, 10 votes. Yes, 3. Abstain, 1. No motion passed. Jonathan Hayworth bowed his head. He said nothing. But he understood the empire he built had now been handed over to the man he once sought to eject from his seat. 9:30 a.m. Derek exits the boardroom. Derek paused before a glass wall overlooking the city skyline on his way out. The world out there has changed. However, the airline industry still thinks skin color determines seat assignment. Today, I'm simply redefining what makes a seat deserved. He turned and walked away. Elise followed. The door closed behind them, but a new one opened for the future of air travel. 2:00 p.m. Aureus Airlines, headquarters, 19th floor, special HR office. A small, cold, windowless conference room. 3 people sat across from one another, as if awaiting a sentence. Chief Flight Attendant Charlotte Duvall quietly fidgeted with her wedding ring. Captain Michael Riley leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain composure. Business Class Manager Daniel Frost stared hard at the nameplate before him, as if it might vanish if he looked long enough. The door opened. Selena Ortiz, head of HR, entered, accompanied by the company's legal counsel and 2 internal security officers. "No pleasantries. We'll get straight to the point," Selena said, her voice firm as steel. After reviewing all the evidence, including surveillance footage, passenger statements, and videos, circulating online, executive leadership has come to a unanimous decision. All 3 of you are hereby terminated with immediate effect. Charlotte gasped. Daniel sat up straight, face flushed. "I was just following orders from higher-ups. That was a VIP customer. VIP customers are not allowed to bribe staff with cash," Selena said. "You accepted $200 to eject a legitimate passenger from his seat. The cameras captured it. The audio is clear. There's no denying it." Captain Michael Riley, who should have remained the most neutral, lowered his head and resigned. "I didn't intervene because I trusted the crew's judgment." "Failing to intervene is complicity, Captain Riley." Selena replied, her voice like a blade. 3 termination files were pushed toward them. The 2 security officers stepped forward. "You'll be escorted to collect your belongings and leave headquarters within 45 minutes. No outrage. Quietly collapsed like a hollow tower whose foundation had been pulled out. 5:00 p.m. Aureus Airlines headquarters. Emergency system wide. Announcement. On the screens of 14,000 employees, from flight attendants and technicians to ticket agents and senior executives, a bold message appeared. Urgent. Notice from CEO Jonathan Hayworth. Effective 6:00 a.m. Tomorrow, all Aureus Airlines operations will be temporarily suspended for 48 hours. This is the first time in our airline's history that every single domestic and international flight will be grounded, not due to weather technical issues or labor strikes, but because we need to stop and relearn how to treat people. All employees are required to participate in mandatory ethics and anti-bias training. No exceptions. The internal network exploded. Messages flew across screens. Is this real? The entire airline grounded. Did someone just wipe out $200 million with one sentence? Who is this guy? A CEO who got dragged out of his seat. 8:00 p.m. Karen Whitmore's penthouse. Westbury District, Long Island. In a lavishly decorated penthouse, Karen sat before her television, a glass of untouched wine in hand. Her eyes didn't move from the breaking news airing on every national channel. Aureus Airlines has announced a 48-hour suspension of all flights to implement anti-discrimination training after a black passenger, a major tech CEO, was forced out of his business class seat due to another passenger bribing the crew. On screen, the footage of Karen slipping money into Daniel's pocket played on repeat. At the same time, her phone buzzed non-stop. Suspension notice from the law firm where she was a partner. Radio silence from her golf club friends. Comments on social media. #airline. Karen. She's the embodiment of privilege and prejudice. Karen set down her glass. Her hand trembled slightly. For the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be looked at with suspicion just because of who you are. 10:30 p.m. Novix Tech Headquarters. Internal strategy meeting. In a brightly lit room that had been buzzing since the afternoon, Derek Coleman stood beside a projector showing live social media analytics. 12 million video views, 4 million shares, 38,000 boycott petitions, over 50,000 new subscribers to the Forgotten Passengers newsletter. Elise chuckled dryly. They tried to push you out of seat 2A. Now you're at the center of aviation reform. Derek didn't smile. His voice was quiet. I didn't do this to destroy them. I did it so they could relearn how to treat people. Sometimes, you have to force an industry to land. 6:00 a.m. Aureus Airlines. Internal Training Center, Dallas. In the main conference room, over 200 uniformed employees sat in rows. A space usually reserved for technical briefings was now the opening venue for an unprecedented program. 48 hours to put humanity first, a mandatory training initiative across the entire industry. There was no upbeat music, no flashy promo video, just a black screen with white letters. Have you ever made someone feel unwelcome? If so, do you remember the look in their eyes? The room went quiet. Then came a video produced by Derek Coleman's team replaying the incident on the flight. Jessica, the flight attendant, said, "This seat isn't for you. Daniel is taking money from Karen." Derek's face pained but calm as he was escorted away under the gaze of whispering passengers. No one said a word. Some bowed their heads. A few covered their faces. 8:45 a.m. Breakout room 6. Invisible value. The group session began with what seemed a simple exercise. Share a time when you were misjudged because of your appearance. Veteran flight attendant Linda Gutierrez, 19 years in the industry, shared, "I was once called a flying maid while in uniform at the airport. I smiled, but in my hotel room, I cried like a child." An Indian engineer told of being mistaken for a security guard. A female supervisor recalled a customer calling her that brown waitress. For the first time, the room shed its armor. 10:15 a.m. Special session, Meet the Impacted. The door opened. The entire hall rose to their feet as Derek Coleman entered. No bodyguards, no expensive suit, just a white rolled-up shirt and a calm expression. He didn't accuse. He told a story. "I wasn't angry when dragged from my seat," he began. "I'd seen that look before, when I was 12, and my mother was pulled into a store security room just because her outfit was too nice for someone there to shop." He spoke of his bitterness as a white passenger handed cash to the crew without question. He named no one, but everyone in the room saw a part of themselves in his words. 1:00 p.m. Special lunch. Seated with difference. Each table was randomly arranged. Flight attendants, captains, directors, janitors, all without hierarchy. At one table, a new hire named April sat beside the head of airport operations. April shared quietly, "I once saw a passenger denied a seat because they were too skinny, like their body didn't fit first class. Today I realize that first class is when you dare to speak up." 4:00 p.m. Deep training session, facing Karen. The final video rolled a short interview with Karen Whitmore, the woman who had bribed the flight crew. She didn't make excuses. On camera, Karen sat with no makeup, eyes swollen. "I was taught that I deserved more. And I believed it to the point that pushing a black man out of his rightful seat felt normal. That day I wasn't just wrong, I was cruel. And I'm sorry." Some employees wept. A few stepped out to regain composure. 6:30 p.m. Novix Tech Headquarters, 17th floor strategy room. Elise handed Derek a file. "This is the program file for Second Flight, a re-entry training program for those terminated due to bias, but who want to learn again. Does it include Jessica Daniel?" "Captain Riley?" Derek asked. "Yes. And Karen, if you want." Derek paused. He didn't answer right away. 8:00 p.m. All staff email from CEO Jonathan Hayworth. "Tomorrow. The first flight after 48 hours of training will take off. But it won't just be a plane lifting off. It will be awareness. It will be accountability. It will be the humanity within each of us reborn. Thank you, Derek Coleman, not just as a customer, but as the person who gave us a chance to become worthy." 8:00 a.m. Novix Tech Headquarters, Special Shareholders Meeting Room. The space was packed with shareholders, financial advisors, and Aureus Airlines Executive Board in a glass-walled room overlooking downtown San Francisco. The room fell silent as Derek Coleman entered with Elise Thompson, Novix's COO. He wore the same simple gray suit from that first day, but this time he held the power to set the terms. Jonathan Hayworth, the current CEO of Aureus, stood and opened. "On behalf of the entire board and our employees, I deeply apologize for what happened on Flight 109, and we understand you're not here to hear an apology." Derek nodded, his gaze, calm, not angry, but focused. "I don't want people fired. I want the system changed. I'm here to make sure what happened to me and millions of others never happens again." He opened his laptop and began projecting a series of statistics charts and footage from the past 48 hours of staff training. The faces of employees, the shift in attitudes and customer feedback. You want to keep the market's trust, don't you? Then, no PR strategy is more effective than actual change. Then he placed 3 documents on the table. A transfer of exclusive rights to the AI-powered internal bias detection training system. A non-discrimination commitment. Memorandum for customers and employees. An unlimited non-discriminatory enrollment form for the Second Flight Rehabilitation Program. No one objected. One of the oldest investors gave a slow nod and whispered, "From today on, this airline won't just fly high, it'll fly right." 2:00 p.m. 12th floor apartment, Midtown. Karen Whitmore sat alone. The TV still replayed footage of her being dubbed Airline Karen. She no longer went into the office. Her old friends let her calls go unanswered. Her public apology went unread. But today, Karen picked up a pen. No social media. No begging for sympathy. Just a handwritten letter placed in a white envelope and sent to Novix's office. "Mr. Derek, I dare not ask for forgiveness, but I enrolled in the Unlearn Bias course your team launched. I was the only non-airline student. I now understand that instead of needing to be right, I need to learn how to listen. If the second flight program is open to people who've made mistakes as grave as mine, please give me a chance not to start over, but to give back what I once took. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore. 4:45 p.m. Gate 9, LAX Airport. Derek boarded the plane in silence. Today, no one challenged his seat. No one stared at him with suspicion. The crew bowed their heads as he entered. A young flight attendant gave a small smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Coleman. Seat 2A is ready for you. No champagne, no grand gestures. Just the seat and respect." 6 months later. International Aviation Conference. Geneva. Derek stood on the main stage. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed Second Flight Initiative, when compassion can take off again. Representatives from over 20 airlines, airport administrators, and global media were seated before him. He didn't speak about the incident. He talked about the right to make mistakes and the duty to correct them. About the right to fly and the responsibility not to make others fall. At an airport lounge. Just another day. A young brown-skinned girl in a janitor's uniform entered the first-class lounge to change out the trash. A flight attendant stepped forward, as if to stop her, then paused. She stepped back and bowed slightly. "Ma'am, is there anything I can assist you with?" The girl smiled faintly. "I'm okay. I'm used to it." But her eyes, they were different now. Something had changed. In a small corner, the employee locker room. On one locker door, a handwritten note was carefully taped. "We don't need to be perfect, but we must have the courage to see and repair what's wrong. DC, this is not an ending. It is a new departure, a flight toward a more just world starting with the smallest of acts."